Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate was disappointing. Okay, before you start typing your extremely well thought out paragraphs in the comments about how I'm wrong, you're right, and I'm a big poophead, just hear me out. What I mean is, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate is disappointing to me. Who am I? Well, I'm not important. But what is important is people like me. Before I go into what that is, let me define what Monster Hunter is. What is Monster Hunter? Essentially, Monster Hunter is a game where you fight monsters, build gear out of their carcasses, fight stronger monsters, build stronger gear, so on and so forth until you finally conquer the hardest of foes. Unless you play anything later than 3rd gen, then you just repeat the loop until you die. Okay, so then what is so disappointing about Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate? The game invented the powered up monsters. It invented the investigation mechanics through Guild Quest, which becomes some of the hardest fights in the game towards the end of G rank. Well, that's kind of the problem. Beginning with Monster Hunter 4, the monsters in the series just stop fighting back essentially until the end of the game. To put it frankly, in Monster Hunter 4 and 4 Ultimate, the game is insultingly easy in the beginning. By now I'm sure you've noticed the videos playing in the corners of the screen here. Before I go any further, I want to point out that I'm not a pro. I'm at best an average player. I take damage often. I'm constantly getting hit. It's a regular occurrence to finish a quest with at least one feint. This is not a case of me being too good for the game. To illustrate the degree of ease Monster Hunter 4U presents, I took on a series of quests against the flagships of both Monster Hunter 4 and Monster Hunter Freedom 2. I'll post a playlist of the hunts I recorded for this video, and you can decide for yourself my level of aptitude. I used the same armor stats with an identical loadout, with the following exceptions: taking max and ancient potions to match the health plus 50 skill of the 4U armor, and an armor talent and charm in Freedom Unite to make my defense 41, while keeping my dragon resistance neutral due to the hidden dragon on Tigrex's charges. In 4 Ultimate, I took nullberries to deal with Gore Magala's frenzy. I also took weapons that both shared equivalent base raw and similar damage equal to the following weaknesses: lightning for Tigrex and fire for Gore Magala. My reasoning for those specific stats is because I beat the entire low-rank village with the partially leveled chainmail set. From Tetsukabra, the last monster I fought before making the set, all the way to Shagaru Magala. That's why I decided against using Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate, as the base defense granted to the player is actually more than the total defense that I used for the experiment. Back to 4 Ultimate, I got to Shagaru without having to engage in half the core loop of Monster Hunter. The only set I had to make was when fighting Zenogre. Chainmail armor has poor lightning resistance, so I made a Bahanabra mix set and beat him with that. Ha! See? You did have to engage! Well, I should probably point out that before Shagaru, Zenogre is the only fight I actually loved in 4 Ultimate. But even then, the set that I used I purposely maxed out at 41 defense and beat Zenogre with no issue. To tell the truth, had I thought about Feline Thundercaller, I probably wouldn't have even had to make that set. Contrast that with my experience in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, where every new star rank of quest required me to make some new set to handle the monsters that were slapping me around. Almost every new encounter for me required a change in some way to overcome the threat. Whereas in 4 Ultimate, every monster prior to the late 5-star quest may have well been in the same rank, because difficulty-wise, they're all the same. Nothing is more difficult than the next. They just fall at your sword, and you never grow. All these points can be demonstrated in a single hunt, the flagship hunts. All the hunts I did for the video were done on the same day. I took 5 hunts for each flagship, Tigrex for Monster Hunter Freedom 2, and Gore for Monster Hunter 4. Of the Gore Magala hunts, I failed 1 hunt and won the other 4, all with a completion time of less than 15 minutes. Of the Tigrex hunts, I failed 4 and only won 1, with a completion time of 26 minutes. But Gore made you fail. You just disproved your whole argument, I hear you say. If I had much experience fighting him prior to this, then I would agree, but this experiment was the first time I hunted him solo with no cats. I fought him in the hub with friends, and the story fights were all with cats. Including the 4 wins I got making these videos, I've only beaten a total of 7 Gore Magalas. Contrast that with Tigrex from Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. Throughout that game, I've successfully hunted a total of 34 Tigrex. One of those is the Tigrex from the final village quest, Monster Hunter. Even with experience with all those hunts, I got destroyed fighting him for this video. Tigrex was not intended to be faced with such pitiful equipment in that initial urgent hunt. The sheer power and ferocity he expresses is frightening. The whole time I literally could not allow myself to have less than full health, or he could kill me in a single combo. The adrenaline, the stress was intoxicating. I could feel my heartbeat in my chest. I was utterly and entirely outmatched. When facing Gore Magala, it was night and day. As you'll see in the videos playing, he had put me on the back foot a few times, but as a whole, he was just so non-threatening that I never once needed to keep my health full. A few times, I could even continue the assault, even with my health dangerously low, at levels I would never have allowed fighting literally anything from Freedom Unite with that weak of equipment. Looking at one of the first armors you can craft in either game, this becomes evident. We're going to look at the Velociprey armor from Freedom Unite and 4 Ultimate. Both armors are rarity 2. Both give you either negate stun or half stun, Freedom Unite and 4 Ultimate respectively. However, the most interesting thing to me is that in Freedom Unite, the armor has 35 more defense, putting it at 100 for the set, than the one from 4 Ultimate, sitting at 65 for the set. The devs gutted the monsters in this game so much at the start that they even nerfed the equipment you can craft because they knew you weren't going to need it, and they were right. You don't need it. Not only is 65 defense more than enough, but it's also just the initial defense, meaning you can upgrade that set to have a staggering 585 defense. You can literally use this set, if you want to, all the way into G rank. Let's look at the Freedom Unite armor. It starts with a base defense of 100 and maxes out at a whopping 310. Except, not only will you need all those defense points, but by design, that set will be obsolete by the next large monster. The reason being is that in Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, armor spheres are hard to come by early in the game. Personally, I felt the armor spheres I needed were hard to get throughout the entire game. In Freedom Unite, it was easier and faster just to make a new set than to try to upgrade yours, and it seemed like you never had enough defense, which taught you how to avoid damage, to play cautiously, to pay attention to what the monster's doing. All the things at the start of 4U don't really teach you at all. Especially if you do make an initial set. You'll never have to make anything else. Before reaching Gore Magala in 4 Ultimate, there were already armor pieces that had half my total defense on a single piece. Monsters were helpless when I had 41 defense, and I kept myself at 41 defense just so I could feel any threat at all. Why on earth would I need 100 defense for anything? Had I made a set with 100 defense, all of the small amount of thrill I got out of those monsters would have evaporated. However, in Freedom Unite, every point matters from the beginning of low rank to the end of G rank. You'll soon see why. I want to analyze some data from the hunts I recorded to kind of illustrate the difference between the monsters of Freedom Unite with the monsters of 4 Ultimate. In the hunts against Tigrex, he hit me an average of 5 times per feint. The breakdown of each hunt can be found by their respective videos. In the hunts against Gore Magala, he hit me an average of 7 times per feint. Out of the hunts, Tigrex made me faint 14 times, resulting in the 4 losses. Gore Magala made me faint only 8 times, resulting in 1 loss, 1 win with 2 feints, and 3 wins with 1 feint. As you can see here, Tigrex with equal defense was much more effective at killing me than Gore. Regardless of his speed and aggression, Gore just couldn't put me down as easily as his Freedom Unite flagship counterpart. There's no better evidence to this fact than the damage formulas for these games themselves. Starting with 3rd Gen, verifiably starting with Portable 3rd, and confirmed through experimentation in 3 Ultimate, Monster Hunter started using a different damage formula for monsters. Both formulas are present on screen now. Let's break down the formula real quick. Attack modifier, quest attack percentage. Example, 5-star absolute power quest has an attack modifier of 115%, or 1.15. Attack power, the attack power of the attack. Example, Tigrex Bite has an attack power of 30. Elemental resistance, the resistance to the element that the attack consists of. Example, all Tigrex's attack in Freedom Unite are Dragon Element. Dragon Element resistance would go here. Rage, the rage modifier. For Tigrex, it would be 1.5. Defense, your hunter's defense. For this example, it's 100. All damage calculations are rounded down to the nearest integer, meaning you drop the decimals. Due to Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate not having any public information regarding the attack modifiers of quests and the attack power of the monsters, from here on out in the formulas for Gore Magala, I will be estimating the attack modifier and attack power entries as I had to reverse engineer the base strength of Gore Magala's attacks. As we'll soon see, the new formula allows defense to absorb more and more damage the higher it is than defense in anything preceding the 3rd generation. Meaning, with a defense of 100 in Freedom Unite, you would take 31 hit points of damage from an enraged Tigrex bite, but with a new formula, all things the same, you would only take 23 damage. Decrease that defense to 41. In Freedom Unite, you would take 41 hit points of damage from an enraged Tigrex bite, but you would only take 34 damage with the new formula. That's a 26% reduction point for point at 100 defense, and a 17% reduction point for point at 41 defense. The disparity continues to grow from there as defense increases. How can this be? Well, it's pretty simple, really. By changing the fixed variable from 160 to 80, they have essentially doubled the effectiveness of each defense point for every game following Freedom Unite. Meaning to equal 200 defense in 4 Ultimate, you'd have to have 400 defense in Freedom Unite. Now do you see why they thought it was just fine to nerf the Velociprey armor, among others? The 4U Velociprey set starts with an effective defense of 130 and caps out at a ridiculous 1160 defense by Freedom Unite standards. A low-rank Velociprey set will offer you more defense capabilities in its lifetime than can ever be achieved legitimately in Freedom Unite. All that basically means is that fundamentally nothing from low to G rank will ever hit as hard as monsters from Freedom Unite in prior, with the exception of the most extreme guild quests and late game monsters. What's even more sad is that I ran the numbers for the set that I beat the final Freedom Unite village quest with an attack modifier of 4, and the damage that Tigrex does with an enraged charge is the same damage that the low rank one does in absolute power when you have 41 defense. In a set with 595 defense and -8 dragon resistance, G-rank equipment, the enraged charge from that Tigrex does 87 damage. The absolute power Tigrex also does 87 damage to a hunter with 41 defense. The difference being, by the time you get to the final village quest in Freedom Unite, you will have learned how to deal with the monsters presented by that point. What does that same souped-up Tigrex, all being equal, do in 4 Ultimate? 49 damage. A whopping 44% less than you would take with equal stats in Freedom Unite. Remember when I said every point in Freedom Unite matters? That's why. To prove this point, let's look at the G-Rank hub quests for Tigrex in Freedom Unite and Generations Ultimate. Attack modifiers are not available for 4U quests as of now. In the G3 Freedom Unite quest Absolute Power, Tigrex has an attack modifier of 3.6. Giving ourselves 500 defense, an enraged charge deals 83 hit points of damage. In the G4 GU quest Tracing the Family Tree, Tigrex has an attack multiplier of 6.2. Giving ourselves 500 defense, an enraged charge deals 82 hit points of damage. Even with a quest modifier that is 72% greater than the Freedom Unite quest, the Tigrex in Generations Ultimate still can't outdamage the Tigrex in Freedom Unite. Hold up, are you really bellyaching over 1 point of damage? Seriously, bruh, who hurt you? Okay, fair point. That does seem insignificant on its face. However, you have to consider that 500 defense in Generations Ultimate is typically seen as the minimum you should have, as in G1 defense. By the time you reach the G4 Tigrex, your defense in all likelihood will be significantly more. Most Blade Masters ends up rocking the Cianatar GX or the Glavenus X. Those sets have an initial defense of 590 and 610 respectively, and they both max out at 800. Although we all know what everyone ends up with, the Neset armor, Atolkaz set. So let's compare a fully upgraded final boss set for both Freedom Unite and Generations Ultimate. The Yukanlo set in Freedom Unite maxes out at 580 defense. The Atolkaz set in Generations Ultimate maxes out at 860. With these numbers, the Freedom Unite Tigrex would do 74 damage. The Generations Ultimate Tigrex would only do 50. To give an even greater perspective, the Attack set at base begins with 670 defense before you even use your first armor sphere. So why are you only whining about 4th gen? What about Gen 3? I hear you say. Well, as previously discussed, Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate gave you bonus defense from the start. So not only is the damage formula reduced, but you have natively more defense. But shouldn't you be just as angry then? Well, I would be, if it wasn't for the fact that 3U has kicked my butt in such a way that 4U hasn't been able to. There are many monsters in 3 Ultimate that have triple carded me more than once on my low rank playthrough. Even with the less harsh defense formula and the extra native defense, I lost to Legaia Cruz multiple times before I was able to fell him on my playthrough. Simply put, I'm not mad at 3 Ultimate because I felt it has challenged me sufficiently. Now with these formulas in mind, let's break down the damage that these monsters can do with each attack at their disposal to see how they compare with 41 defense. Let's start with Freedom Unite Village Absolute Power Tigrex. Tigrex has a total of 7 attacks. The attack modifier for the Village Absolute Power quest is 1.15, and the attack powers of the attacks, as well as the damage they did at 41 defense, will be displayed now. Now the 4U Village tipping the scales Gore Magala. Gore Magala has 13 attacks. 2 of his attacks do different damage depending on where he hits you. The quest has an estimated attack modifier of 1.25, and the estimated attack power of each attack will be listed along with the damage it does. As you can see here, Gore Magala has twice the number of attacks at his disposal, but it still wasn't enough to make me fail more than once. And that time was only because I'm not as familiar with him as I should be. Gore just can't outdamage the previous flagships. Even his strongest attacks couldn't outdamage the Tigrex's strongest attacks. If a game's flagship is any indicator of the monsters present in the game as a whole, as I believe they are, then 4 and by extension 4 Ultimate is severely lacking. The visuals and monster designs in this game are truly breathtaking. It introduces so much to the series that I enjoy, but it ruins it by spitting in the faces of people like me that know what we want out of these games. Put simply, people like me want to enjoy the thrill of overcoming a monster throughout the whole experience, not just in the end game, which really, it's the most extreme of monsters that really can do that in 4 Ultimate. When people like me crack open what's affectionately called the single greatest Monster Hunter after playing the gem that is Freedom Unite, we expect not to be insulted, and by its nature and design philosophy, insult us it does. Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate suffers from a flawed design philosophy. The producer for Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate said this is certainly the easiest Monster Hunter game for a newcomer to get into. Not to say that it's an easy game overall, of course. The producer here admits that this, at the time, was the easiest Monster Hunter game to start. The problem, though, with lowering the difficulty to such an insulting degree is that you don't learn anything, or at least not enough. So once you finally hit the ranks that everyone lauds this game for, you're completely and utterly lost. You have no idea what to do because you've never had to try. Heightening the difficulty is a standard of Monster Hunter games. Each rank of hunts is designed to be more challenging than the last. However, the issue that 4 Ultimate suffers from, and by extension every game that follows, is none of the monsters in the beginning ranks are much easier or harder than any other one, minus a couple of exceptions. If you can kill a Great Jaggy, then you can kill a Celtis, a Zamtrios, and a Najarala. None of them require anything more than bashing your head against them until they die. That is, until you get the Shagaru. Shagaru is the only fight in Lowering Village that actually tests any of your skills. He's fast, he's aggressive, he hits hard, he never gives you a break. He's everything that Gore Magala should have been. My only issue with Shagaru is that I beat even him wearing the same weak chainmail armor that I beat everything else with. All the positive attributes that he possessed, and it still wasn't enough to overcome an average at best Monster Hunter player with trash armor. But when you play G-Rank in the games you're complaining about, some of those monsters still do massive damage. How can you still say they're weaker than monsters from Freedom Unite? I'm glad you asked. Let's examine that. Looking at the chart here, we can see that because of the change in formula, the effective defense that hunters are capable of accumulating in games post-Freedom Unite is massive, and the quest modifiers have to be increased by a multiple factor just so they can do the same damage. Out of the games that we have quest data for, we can compare the number of quests that actually meet or exceed the necessary attack modifier in order for the monster to rival the strongest monsters in Freedom Unite. It's evident by the information found that these games on average don't come close to the same damage potential of Freedom Unite. Only a minuscule number of them can outdamage Freedom Unite monsters based on their quest modifier. Granted, not all monster attacks have the same base power. For instance, it's been commonly believed that the Nakarkos beam has an attack power of 200. That for sure dwarfs basically any attack that a Freedom Unite monster can perform just based on the attack power alone, right? Not really. Akantor and Ukanlos in Freedom Unite have a howl or beam that has an attack power of 180. If you get hit dead on by either of these, you're dead. If they just graze you while enraged and you're not at 150 HP, you're dead instantly. But the thing is that these quests aren't even the ones with the highest attack modifiers. They actually have a below average quest modifier for G rank. The modifier for the Ukanlos and Akantor event quest is 3.5. The average G rank quest modifier is 3.6, which is the equivalent to 10.8 in GU and 13.2 in Worldborn. On average, the quests in those games don't come close. So again, as far as monsters in newer games that can outdamage Freedom Unite monsters, they are so few it's almost pointless to mention them. Let's talk for a minute about the difficulty progression in Freedom Unite. It is my opinion that Monster Hunter Freedom Unite has the best difficulty progression of all the games in the series that I have played. Every star level that you increase feels more difficult, from beginning to end. 2-star quests will pressure you more generally than 1-star quests. 3-star quests and 5-star quests are night and day. Even the change of ranks is a gradual but noticeable increase in difficulty. Low-rank Rathalos is just easier than high-rank Kutku. The Wrath can't outdamage it. The Rathalos has more attacks at its disposal, but the Kutku doesn't have to hit you as much to take you out. You feel the difference. But because of how difficult that Rathalos was when you fought it, it taught you skills that allowed you to manage that Kutku. It taught you how to survive, how to regroup. You couldn't just swing your weapon and kill it before it killed you. It's in this way that Freedom Unite teaches the hunters progressively how to deal with the ever-increasing threat of what comes next. G rank in Freedom Unite is a beast, but the jump from HR6 to HR7 is marginal enough that it's not unfamiliar and overwhelming. Now take 4U, a game where you literally don't have to make anything more than Rarity 1 armor to get to high rank, where once you make your first high rank set, you'll pretty much be okay until G rank. What happens in G rank when the training wheels come off and reality sets in? Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate, by trying to be easier to pick up, insulted the player by not challenging them and not teaching them the skills they're going to need for most of the game, which is G rank. Constantly, I see new players begging for help because they're new to high rank or G rank and everything is just too overwhelming. They aren't used to the abuse that they're facing, and many of them just never finish because it's too much. Capcom has been routinely disrespecting the players and their own monsters by nerfing the ability of base monsters to threaten the player in order to promote their idiotic powered-up monster systems they keep crapping out for the sake of accessibility, and unlike popular belief, they didn't start this with World. It started with Monster Hunter 4. It's just that no one noticed, but I did. I'm sure you all will have your own takes on what I've said here. It's not my intention to disparage the Monster Hunter team or for Ultimate in general, or even to give unwarranted praise to Freedom Unite. It's just that 4U could have been so much more if they had had the guts to really challenge us throughout the whole experience. If you made it this far, I thank you for putting up with the ravings of a madman. I'd like to invite you to click post on that essay you've been working on since the video started, and to like the video and subscribe to the channel. My wife Sparrow, my daughter Jean, my cousin Cosmic, and I all stream Monster Hunter every Friday at 8:15 Central Standard Time, here on YouTube as well as Twitch. Links in the description. I hope to see you around.